Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations, joins me. The situation in the Middle East requires you to watch very carefully now for states collapsing around Israel. Those collapses, and there are several, there could be up to 4. Right now, there are 2 known. Those collapses change the calculus for the whole region. For all of the 20th century peace plans, gone. Instead, we have a new map. Malcolm, Egypt. The collapse is not slow anymore. I'm told that it's accelerating. The Morsi government has lost the credibility in the street. The question here is also lost the credibility in the army. At the same time, it's looking to inject Muslim brothers into the military academies and take over the army. This means that the radicalization, the Ikhwanization, Ikhwan is the name of the Muslim brothers in Egypt, the Ikhwanization of Egypt proceeds apace. That is not peaceful, Malcolm.
No, it is not peaceful, and it's true that the situation in Egypt has been eclipsed by developments both in Iran and more recently Syria, but no one can forget that Egypt is so vital. It is the largest Arab country. It sets the pace. The Muslim Brotherhood victory there certainly was of the greatest significance of all of their electoral victories. And what we're seeing now is the increasing Islamization of Egypt, but at the same time, people are beginning to starve. The pound, the Egyptian currency, has gone down 40% since December. We see the subsidies that have been in place for decades are being removed on things like beans, food products, milk, basic staples, because the government doesn't have the funds to continue it. And this is going to lead to extreme reactions in the country, more and more demonstrations, because the black market is soaring. People can't get gas. Truck drivers say they can fill up in the morning, and that people who own these gas stations, which are mostly state-run, keep half of it and then sell it on the black market at 20 or 30% more than the regular price. And a quarter of the gross domestic product of Egypt was going into these subsidies. So we have a situation a system that was inefficient with the national subsidies and perhaps should be removed, but not under these circumstances. And I think we're going to see a further destabilization, and that spills over to an area we've been concerned about a lot, and that is the Sinai, where an interesting new aspect is the clash between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Bedouin. And the Bedouin were accused by a top-ranking Muslim Brotherhood cleric, and he said that 1/3 of the Bedouin are spies for the army, 1/3 are spies for the Egyptian police, and 1/3 for the Israelis. There were riots. They attacked the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Bedouin, demanding an apology, and something was finally worked out. But this is a growing tension, and we've talked about the radicalization of the Bedouin population, and Egypt's army has no control.
The Bedouins are the smugglers, they're the drug runners, right. They're the gun runners at the same time.
You can't crack down on that because that's what they live on.
They live there. All right, there's too little time, Malcolm. We must move immediately to Syria. In these last days, the term red line has been used by several different speakers. First in Israel, a general saying red line, chemical weapons been crossed by the Assad regime. My information, no conclusive medical evidence. The sarin sample in the soils notwithstanding, what we have here is no medical evidence of the attack, especially March 19th. The Obama administration first seemed to go along with the U.S. intelligence rejection of the comment by the Israeli general at a conference. And now, within these last hours, Secretary of Defense Hagel in Dubai, in the region, commenting that there is sort of chemical weapon use
in the last 2 days,
although
intelligence
there are varying assessments, meaning there's wiggle room here. The red line has been crossed or it hasn't been crossed, and the Obama administration now late in the day says that we will still reserve our decision as to when we're going to inject ourselves militarily into the Syria regime. Is it your opinion right now that the Obama regime, the Obama administration, will move against Assad, or are they still holding back?
No, I don't believe that if moving means even military weapons and things, I don't believe that will happen. The Secretary of State has talked about NATO needs to intervene, but we see no chance right now that NATO will do so, short, I think, of this chemical weapons issue, which could give cover, and the Erdogan government, Turkey, is pressing very hard for action. They're very disappointed.
At NATO.
And at NATO, at the NATO level. And one of the things that European countries now are worrying about is that there are hundreds and hundreds, even according to their own anti-terror chief of the EU, Europeans from France, Ireland, England, but every other country as well, those three primarily, who are fighting inside Syria. And these guys are going to come back. They don't go as jihadists, but they're going to come back as jihadists and certainly radicalized. So you have a lot of factors. Also, we see the breakdown in Syria where the army, the pro-Assad army, is now breaking down into militia, in part because they want to fight at home, in part because they can loot as a response. And what we used to, if you remember, they were called the Shabiha. We've talked about them, and they're sort of like the Basiji of
right.
Syria.
They're goons.
Well, they're goons, right? But they are now reorganizing, and you have Christians and some and the Alawites with some Druze joining these groups. They're very brutal. They're operating in their home territories. They get paid by the army, but also can take anything they get from looting. Also, at the same time, we see the reports that Hezbollah, and they showed pictures on television of Hezbollah fighting in Damascus, and they said that along the Lebanese border, they've turned it over to the Hezbollah. Hezbollah is storing bodies because they can't bring back all the casualties at one time, so that they are putting them in they're warehousing them and bringing that 1, 2, 3, 4 at a time, even though in Homs as many as 40 may have been killed or more. So we're seeing a lot of dynamic in this conflict, with the various layers being on the Sunni Shiite layer, the Assad versus the people layer. All of these things are now in play, and the chemical issue could be a key to a different path.
I mentioned my information is that the Syrian Alawite Assad regime is on the offensive in the western part of the state very successfully.
Right.
This is the Aleppo-Damascus highway to the Mediterranean, and they are cutting off the so-called rebel forces, which in many instances are hirelings of the Turkish military intelligence and others, and they're cutting them off, and my information is that that is a very successful offensive, underlining the Russian position that without the cross-border incursion, cross-border provocations from Turkey, this war would have ended some time ago, because the Russians and the Iranians and the Lebanese have supported the Assad regime. They have the weapons, they have the system, they have the men, they have the money, and the rebels cannot stand up to this.
And look at al-Nusra and look at all these other groups.
We mentioned that this is not a case where al-Qaeda is going to win this if the Iranian regime continues with the Russians to support the Alawites. We mentioned that tonight because we have to, and Malcolm's mentioned NATO, we have to move immediately to the question with Turkey, Malcolm. The Turkish situation is not clear to any of us with regard to Israel, and that's a critical one. Rapprochement. John Kerry says that there's been a knitting together. My information says there's no knitting together. There's no trust between Jerusalem and Ankara, because Erdogan and his foreign minister continue to make provocative remarks, and actually they're just boasting about their anti-Israeli history.
Right, and saying that they keep raising the ante on Israel, demanding a complete removal of the blockade. Although there was supposedly some progress made by the Israeli delegation that visited Tehran, there was negotiations over the amount of money of the compensation. But I think what you're pointing to is much more fundamental about what Erdogan's policy and what his direction is. And the fact that he says he's going to Gaza, he'll probably postpone it till after his May 16th meeting with the president, because it would certainly anger the United States. The United States has asked him not to go, and certainly put it off until after the visit. But it indicates exactly what you've said, and that is he's playing a very dangerous game in the region, undermining Fatah. Abbas has asked him not to go to Gaza. Certainly Israel would prefer he not go. He is trying to extend Turkish influence. He is competing with Iran in many places beyond in the greater region. So this is part of Erdogan's strategy, both at home and abroad.
Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. I'm John Batchelor.